Hello and welcome, very briefly, to Cumber, the hometown of Thomas Andrews, who was one of RMS Titanic's designers. Today we'll be having a look at where this magnificent ship and her two sisters were constructed by Harland and Wolff at the mouth of the River Lagan in Belfast. We'll begin at the end, the last surviving ship of the White Star Line, SS Nomadic. Here she sits in the Hamilton dry dock, beautifully restored in the company's livery. She worked as a tender vessel to the Olympic and Titanic in Cherbourg, France, ferrying passengers from land to the great ocean liners because they were too large to fit in the harbour. The Nomadic performed this task alongside the SS Traffic, with the former handling first and second class passengers, while the latter carried third class. She had a short career as a minesweeper during the First World War, before being returned to the White Star Line in 1919. Later in the century, she faced being scrapped on multiple occasions, and was used as a floating restaurant in Paris before being purchased by the Northern Irish government and brought home in 2006 for restoration. If it isn't obvious, this is the Titanic Museum. In front of us were the purpose-built slipways where construction of the 3 Olympic-class liners began. The museum was built to the same height as the ship's enormous hulls, so you can easily imagine the Titanic and Olympic side by side, towering above us. The posts represent the arrow gantry that encased the ships. Starting from the forward well deck, we will walk the remaining length of the Titanic to the stern along the starboard side. As you'll see, patterns have been made on the ground to indicate various points of the ship. Right now we are passing the first funnel and, a few steps later, the forward first class entrance that contains the famous grand staircase. The first notable marked feature is the position of the second funnel. Assuming we are on the boat deck, we are currently standing in the gymnasium. Pretending we magically drop down to A deck, we walk through the first class lounge. It was around this location that the ship tore apart while sinking. We now face through the wall onto a first class promenade, passing the third funnel. To our left, as we step onto the second class promenade, are the outlines of lifeboats 9, 11, 13 and 15. We also pass the fourth funnel. The fourth funnel here may not have been connected to any of the boilers, but it was still used for ventilating the room far below containing the turbine engine, as well as other miscellaneous functions. To our right is the second class entrance. These circles mark the locations of electric cranes for hoisting cargo aboard. We now tumble down the steps onto the aft well deck, which was also used as the third class promenade and is where the third class entrance is. Finally, we go up onto the stern. And here, when ready for launch, the Olympic, Titanic and Britannic slid gracefully into the water in 1910, 1911 and 1914. The liners were still far from finished at this point, however. Our next stop will be the graving dock that was constructed specifically to support these behemoths. Here's Caroline's Arse, the stern end of the HMS Caroline, a First World War era light cruiser that was only decommissioned in 2011. She took part in and is the last surviving ship of the Battle of Jutland in 1916. This legendary naval engagement was the largest of the war and involved 151 Royal Navy ships against 99 from Germany's Kaiserliche Marine. She is now a museum ship here in Alexandra Graving Dock. On the right is Titanic at Thompson Wharf, which jutted out into Victoria Channel but no longer exists. The problem with building the largest ocean liners in the world is that the world didn't have a dry dock big enough to accommodate them. So, long before Olympic's keel was laid, work began on removing 300,000 cubic yards of clay and sand to create Thompson Graving Dock. In September 1911, near Southampton, RMS Olympic had a collision with the HMS Hawke, leaving 2 huge gashes in her hull and flooding 2 of her watertight compartments. Despite this damage, she was able to steam herself back to Belfast, further fueling the idea that this class of liners was indeed unsinkable. Unfortunately, at that time, Titanic was still being worked on in Thompson Dry Dock, so she had to be taken out to allow for Olympic's urgent repair work. Only a few months later, in February 1912, Olympic lost a propeller blade, which again diverted resources away from finishing Titanic. These events pushed back the planned date for Titanic's maiden voyage, and was yet another addition to the long list of unfortunate coincidences that put the ship on her fateful collision course with the iceberg. This drawing shows Titanic as she would have looked on the slipway surrounded by the Aral gantry. Looming large in the background of this photo is Titanic, still under construction on the slipway. As you can see by the empty gantry space to her port side, Olympic has already been launched. Even though they were all created to perform the exact same duty of crossing between Southampton and New York, the 3 sisters had very different stories once they emerged from the shipyard. The oldest one, Olympic, went on to serve a full career of transatlantic crossings before being scrapped in the 1930s. We're all very familiar with Titanic's devastating maiden voyage, in which an iceberg inflicted multiple scraping gashes along her starboard side, uncontrollably flooding one too many of her watertight compartments and sinking her. The youngest, and often forgotten, Britannic, never got a chance to carry passengers across the Atlantic because she was immediately brought into service as a hospital ship during the First World War and was sunk by a mine in the Aegean Sea. And that's all I have for this little tour. Today, Harland Wolff's shipbuilding capacity is a minute fraction of what it was 100 years ago, but as we have seen, there are plenty of leftover fragments of this era of maritime industrial might to be found.